Last Christmas, I made the mistake of believing my house was actually mine. While I was 3,000 miles away in California, living what I thought was my own life, my family was turning the key to my front door. Not to check on things, not to water plants or collect mail. They were moving in, rearranging my furniture, erasing my photos, hosting dinner parties at my table. And when I came home, exhausted and unsuspecting, I found my mother standing in my kitchen, wearing pearls and a smile that told me everything I'd worked for had just become hers. But that wasn't even the worst part. My name is Rachel Monroe. And last Christmas, I learned that the house I spent my entire life earning was never really mine to begin with. But to understand how my family dismantled everything while I was 3,000 miles away, you need to know where it all started. Cedar Falls, Iowa, 1974. The kind of town where your worth was measured by the square footage of your home and the silence you kept about what happened inside it. I was the middle child. That's what people say when they want to be polite about it. But in the Monroe family, being in the middle meant something different. My older brother Ethan got the pride. My younger sister Claire got the affection. I got the work. My mother, Janice, had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you were being appraised. Not loved, appraised. She'd stand in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed, watching me scrub the floor on my hands and knees, and she'd nod once. That nod meant I was useful. My father, Howard, barely spoke. He believed that silence was the same as peace, that if nobody complained out loud, then everything was fine. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about a lot of things when I was 8 years old. I was already doing chores that most kids didn't touch until high school. Baseboards, laundry, dishes for 6 people. My mother called it character building. I called it exhausting. By the time I was 10, I wasn't just taking care of the house anymore. I was taking care of Claire. She was 5, with blonde ringlets and big blue eyes that made adults melt. My mother would leave us alone for hours while she went to her bridge club or her garden society meetings. Take care of your sister Rachel. Make sure she doesn't get into trouble. It was always my responsibility, never Ethan's. He got to play baseball and go to friends' houses. I got to change diapers and make mac and cheese from a box. At 12, something shifted. My mother started talking about the house differently. She'd walk through rooms, running her fingers along the furniture, talking about legacy and family and permanence. One afternoon, I was dusting the living room when she came in and stood by the window, looking out at our street like she was surveying a kingdom. "This house stays standing because of discipline," she said without looking at me. "Remember that, Rachel?" I stopped dusting and looked at her. I wanted to ask what she meant. I wanted to ask if she noticed that I was the only one keeping it standing, but I didn't. Instead, I asked something else. Something that had been building in me for months. "Will this house ever be mine?" She turned then and she smiled. But it wasn't a warm smile. It was quick, too quick, like she'd been waiting for me to ask. "Houses don't belong to people, Rachel," she said, walking toward me slowly. "Families decide." I remembered the way she emphasized that word. Decide, not inherit. Not earn, decide. I nodded because that's what you did with my mother. You nodded and you kept working and you didn't ask questions. But even then, even at 12 years old, something cold settled in my stomach. She wasn't talking about ownership. She was talking about control. And I was too young to understand that in the Monroe family, control was currency. The person who had it made the rules. The person who didn't have it paid the price. I spent the next 30 years paying. I paid in late nights and missed opportunities. I paid in phone calls I answered when I should have been living my own life. I paid in plane tickets back to Cedar Falls every time there was a crisis, which seemed to happen whenever I got too comfortable somewhere else. I paid in silence when Ethan made decisions about our parents' care without asking me. I paid in forced smiles when Claire showed up at family dinners with a new designer bag while I was still driving the same car from 2008. But the house? God, the house. It stayed in the back of my mind like a promise that was never actually made. My mother mentioned it sometimes. "When you're older, Rachel, when the time is right, we'll make sure you're taken care of." I should have known better. I should have heard what she wasn't saying. But I wanted to believe that all those years of showing up, of being responsible, of being the one who stayed when everyone else left, that it meant something. That I meant something. Last December, I was in California for work, a conference in San Diego that I'd been looking forward to for months. Finally, something for me. Finally, a chance to focus on my career, my life, my future. I landed at the airport on December 18th, checked into my hotel, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. 3 days later, my phone rang at 2 in the morning. It was Claire, and the first words out of her mouth made my blood run cold. "Rachel," she said, her voice shaking in that performative way she'd perfected since childhood, "we need to talk about the house." By the time I hit my 20s, I understood one fundamental truth. If I stayed in Cedar Falls, I would disappear. Not physically. Worse than that, I would become the version of myself my mother had been building since I was 8 years old. The dependable one. The one who sacrificed. The one who showed up to every holiday and birthday and crisis with a casserole and a smile. While my own life withered in the background like a plant, nobody remembered to water. So I left. I packed 2 suitcases and a duffel bag, enrolled in a nursing program 3 hours away, and didn't look back. My mother cried at the door. Not because she'd miss me, I realized later, but because I was disrupting the system. Who would take care of things now? Who would be the backbone she'd spent years carefully constructing? I studied hard, worked night shifts at a hospital to pay tuition, survived on vending machine dinners and 4 hours of sleep. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My choices, my schedule, my life. Meanwhile, Ethan stayed in Cedar Falls, living in the basement of our childhood home, supposedly helping Dad with home repairs and yard work. Helping was a generous word for what he actually did, which was mostly watching sports and occasionally mowing the lawn. But my mother praised him constantly. Ethan's so devoted. Ethan's such a good son. He stayed. The implication was always there, hanging in the air like smoke. He stayed and you left. Claire got married at 22 to a man she'd known for 6 months. It lasted 3 years. She moved back home after the divorce, taking over my old bedroom, redecorating it with cream-colored furniture and fairy lights. My mother welcomed her back like a returning hero. My poor baby. You've been through so much. Nobody mentioned that I'd been through nursing school, clinicals, state boards, and building an entire career on my own. When I was 33, I did something that felt impossible. I bought a house. A real house, white siding, blue front door, a small yard with a maple tree that turned brilliant red every October. Naperville, Illinois. Far enough from Cedar Falls to feel like freedom. Close enough that I couldn't use distance as an excuse not to visit. The day I closed on it, I sat in the empty living room and cried. My name was on that deed. Mine alone. No family strings attached. No conditional ownership. No cryptic comments about who decides what. For the first time in my life, I had something that nobody could take from me. I was wrong about that too, but I didn't know it yet. My mother came to visit 6 weeks after I moved in. I'd spent those weeks painting, arranging furniture, making the place feel like home. I was proud. Excited to show her what I'd built, she walked through every room with her hands clasped behind her back, nodding occasionally, her mouth pressed into a thin line. When we finished the tour, she stood in my kitchen and looked around one more time. It feels temporary, she said finally. I blinked at her. What? This place, she said, gesturing vaguely. It doesn't feel settled. It feels like you're still figuring things out. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that settled wasn't the point. That I'd spent my entire childhood in a house that felt like a museum, where we weren't allowed to touch anything or move anything or be anything except what she decided. But I didn't. I smiled and offered her tea, and we sat at my kitchen table making small talk about weather and traffic, like we were strangers at a bus stop, before she left. She asked for a spare key. Just in case, Rachel, what if something happens and we need to reach you? I hesitated. Something in me resisted, but I couldn't articulate why. It seemed reasonable on the surface. Parents have spare keys. That's normal. So I made her a copy. 2 weeks later, she called again. Claire's been having a hard time. Could you make her a key too? Just for emergencies. She's worried about you being alone. I said no. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I just said no. The silence on the other end of the line lasted 5 full seconds. Then my mother said, in that cool, measured voice she used when she was angry, I see. And she hung up. A month later, Ethan called. We didn't talk often. Our relationship had always been cordial but distant. Like coworkers who nod at each other in the hallway but never have lunch. So when his name popped up on my phone, I answered with suspicion already curling in my stomach. Hey Ratch, he said. Too casual, too friendly. Just checking in. Wanted to see how the new place is treating you? We talked for a few minutes about nothing. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, So who handles your mail if you're gone? I froze. What? You know, if you travel for work or whatever, who picks up your mail? Keeps an eye on things. I hadn't told him I traveled for work. I hadn't told anyone in my family. My job occasionally required conferences, site visits, training sessions in other cities. But I kept that information private, separate. I don't travel that much, I said slowly. Oh, he said. I thought Mom mentioned something about it. Must have been confused. He wasn't confused, and my mother wasn't either. Someone was paying attention. Someone was taking notes. The first time I left Naperville for more than 2 weeks, it was for a training program in Denver. Advanced cardiac care. 2.5 weeks of intensive coursework. I was excited, focused. I barely thought about home. But when I came back, something felt different. Nothing I could point to exactly. Nothing missing or moved. Just a feeling. Like someone had been there. I walked through every room, checking locks, looking in closets, opening drawers. Everything was where I'd left it, but the air felt disturbed somehow, like the house had been holding its breath. I told myself I was paranoid, tired from travel, imagining things. I ignored the feeling, pushed it down, locked it away in the same mental drawer where I kept all the other uncomfortable truths about my family. That was my mistake, because they were already planning, already circling, and I had just shown them that I could be gone long enough for them to make their move. At 47 years old, I thought I understood my family. I thought I'd built enough distance, enough boundaries, enough of my own life that they couldn't reach me anymore. I was wrong. In early December, my hospital offered me a spot in an advanced cardiac care training program in San Diego. 6 weeks. Full certification. A significant career boost. It was scheduled to run from December 18th through the end of January. 6 weeks felt like a long time to be away, especially over the holidays. But it was also an opportunity I couldn't pass up. Still, something gnawed at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. Like leaving my house unattended for that long was dangerous somehow. I know how that sounds, paranoid, dramatic. But when you grow up in a family that treats love like negotiation and belonging like a contract, you develop instincts about these things. I called my mother to tell her about the trip. I expected resistance, guilt trips, comments about missing Christmas. Instead, she sounded almost cheerful. "You should go, Rachel. You've always been so selfish about staying put." I held the phone away from my ear and stared at it. Selfish about staying put. The words didn't make sense together, but that was classic Janice Monroe. Rewriting reality until it fit whatever narrative she needed. I packed my bags, set my alarm system, arranged for mail hold, and left for California on December 18th. San Diego was beautiful. 70 degrees and sunny while the Midwest froze. The training was intense but rewarding. For 3 days, I felt like I'd made the right choice. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Tom, my neighbor. Tom was retired, kind, the type who waved from his porch and occasionally borrowed my ladder. We weren't close, but we looked out for each other. His message was short. "Hey, there are people at your house." Family, my stomach dropped. I typed back quickly. "Yes, my brother probably stopped by to check on things." That had to be it. Ethan had a spare key from years ago when he'd helped me move furniture. I'd never asked for it back. Tom sent another message. "Oh, okay, just wanted to make sure." Then, a few seconds later, a photo. I opened it and felt the air leave my lungs. My front door, my blue front door with the Christmas wreath I'd hung before leaving. Except it wasn't my wreath anymore. This one was different. Red velvet bow, gold pine cones. Elaborate, expensive looking, old-fashioned. I knew that wreath. I'd seen it every Christmas growing up, hanging on our door in Cedar Falls. My mother's wreath, the one she'd had since the 80s. But that was impossible. That wreath had been in Iowa, in my childhood home. Why was it on my door in Illinois? I tried calling my mother. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. I called Ethan straight to voicemail. Claire didn't answer either. I called my mother again, and again, nothing. My hands were shaking. I logged into my security system app, the one connected to my alarm. The screen loaded slowly, and when it did, my blood ran cold. System deactivated. December 2 days ago. Deactivated manually. From inside the house. I called the security company. They confirmed what I already knew. Someone with the access code had turned it off. I was the only person with that code. I hadn't given it to anyone. I hadn't written it down anywhere. I changed it every 6 months specifically to avoid this. So how did someone get in and turn it off? I spent the next 4 days trying to reach my family. I left voicemails. I sent texts. I called my Aunt Patricia, my cousin Lena, even my father's old poker buddy Walt. Nobody answered. Nobody called back. It was like they'd all coordinated to ghost me simultaneously. On Christmas Eve, I sat in my hotel room in San Diego, staring at my phone, watching other people's holiday photos flood social media. I felt crazy, paranoid. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Ethan had stopped by to check on the house and decided to decorate. Maybe the wreath was a surprise, a nice gesture. But my gut knew better. My gut knew that nothing my family did was ever just a nice gesture. On December 26th, I booked a flight home. I couldn't wait until the end of the program. I needed to see my house. I needed to know what was happening. The training coordinator wasn't happy, but I didn't care. I was on a plane by noon. I landed in Chicago at 8 p.m., rented a car, and drove straight to Naperville. The closer I got to my house, the faster my heart beat. I turned onto my street just after 10 p.m., and immediately I knew something was wrong. My driveway was full. Ethan's truck, Claire's white SUV, my mother's sedan, all parked like they belonged there, like this was their house. I pulled up to the curb because there was no room for my rental car in my own driveway. I sat there for a full minute staring at my house. The lights were on, every single one. My living room, my kitchen, upstairs bedrooms. It looked like a party was happening. In my house? Without me, I got out of the car and walked up to my front door. The wreath was still there. My mother's wreath. I reached for the handle and turned it. Unlocked, I pushed the door open and stepped inside, and the scene that greeted me made me feel like I'd walked into an alternate dimension. My furniture had been rearranged. The couch I'd positioned facing the fireplace was now against the opposite wall. My coffee table was gone, replaced with one I didn't recognize. My bookshelves had been moved. The photos I'd hung, pictures of me at nursing school graduation, at conferences with friends, they were gone. In their place were old Monroe family photos, pictures from Cedar Falls, my parents' wedding photo, Ethan's high school baseball team, Claire's first communion. It was like someone had erased me from my own house and replaced me with the past. I walked toward the kitchen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Voices drifted toward me, laughter, the clinking of glasses. I stepped into the kitchen and froze. My mother stood at the head of my dining table, wearing a cream-colored sweater and pearls, smiling like a hostess at a dinner party. Around the table sat Ethan, Claire, a man I didn't recognize who must have been Claire's new boyfriend, my cousin Lena, Aunt Patricia, and Walt. They were eating brunch food, pancakes, fruit, mimosas in my glassware. My mother looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. Her smile didn't falter. "Rachel," she said pleasantly, like I'd just walked in from the grocery store. "You're home early." The word hung in the air like poison. I wasn't early. This was my house. I lived here. But the way she said it, the way everyone at the table avoided my eyes, it was clear. I was the intruder. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. My eyes scanned the room and landed on something that made my stomach turn. A manila folder, sitting on my kitchen counter, thick, official looking. The label on the tab read, Monroe Family Residence, Legal. I took a step toward it. My mother shifted slightly, blocking my path. Before I could say anything, before I could demand to know what was happening, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and standing in my hallway, briefcase in hand, wearing a suit I recognized from meetings I'd had with him over the years, was my lawyer, David Brennan, the man I'd trusted with my will, my estate planning, my power of attorney documents. He looked at me. Then he looked at my mother, and he smiled at her. Not me, her. I stared at him. At David Brennan, my lawyer, the man I'd paid for years to protect my interests, the man who knew every detail of my financial life, my estate plan, my wishes. He was standing in my hallway holding a briefcase, looking at my mother like they were old friends, like they'd planned this. "David," I said, my voice shaking, "what are you doing here?" He cleared his throat and stepped fully into the kitchen. Professional, composed, like this was just another client meeting. "Rachel," he said carefully, "there's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? The word felt obscene. My mother remained seated at the head of my dining table, her hands folded in front of her, calm and confident. Everyone else at the table had gone silent. Ethan stared at his plate. Claire picked at her napkin. The boyfriend, Mark, looked uncomfortable, like he'd realized too late that he'd walked into something dark. David set his briefcase on my counter, right next to the manila folder. He opened it with a soft click and pulled out a stack of papers. "Rachel, I think it would be best if we all sat down and discussed this calmly." "I'm not sitting down," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "I want to know what the hell is happening in my house." David glanced at my mother. She gave him a small nod. Permission. He was waiting for her permission. "In my house?" He pulled the papers from the folder and spread them across my kitchen counter like evidence at a trial. Inside were documents I didn't recognize, legal forms, typed official. The first one was labeled Temporary Occupancy Filing. I scanned it quickly. It claimed that due to concerns about the primary resident's well-being and ability to maintain the property, temporary occupancy had been granted to family members for care and oversight purposes. My hands started to shake. "What is this?" David spoke in that measured lawyer voice, the one designed to de-escalate. "It's a legal provision that allows family members to temporarily occupy a property when there are concerns about the owner's capacity to manage it." I felt like I'd been punched. Capacity? I'm a nurse. I work full-time. I own this house outright. There's nothing wrong with my capacity. He pulled out another document. This one was labeled Medical Concerns Affidavit. I grabbed it before he could explain. It was signed by my mother. The statement claimed I'd been showing signs of instability, erratic behavior, forgetting important dates, neglecting home maintenance, expressing paranoia about family members. All lies, every single word. "This is insane," I said, my voice breaking. "None of this is true." My mother finally spoke. Her voice was soft, sympathetic, almost kind. "Rachel, you've been under so much stress. We've all noticed it. The way you isolate yourself, the way you refuse help, we're worried about you." I looked around the table, at Ethan, who still wouldn't meet my eyes. At Claire, who was nodding along like our mother's words made perfect sense. At Aunt Patricia, who looked genuinely concerned, like she believed this narrative. They'd built a story, a whole story about me, and I hadn't even known I was the villain in it. David pulled out another document, and when I saw it, my legs almost gave out. Power of attorney. The header was clear. The language was legal and binding, and at the bottom, a signature. My signature. Except I'd never signed it. "I've never seen this before," I said, my hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. "I didn't sign this." David's expression shifted, uncomfortable now. "Rachel, this was signed in my office. July 14th. You came in to update your estate documents?" I wasn't in his office in July, I was working. I checked my phone, scrolling frantically through my calendar. July 14th. I'd been at the hospital, a 12-hour shift. I had the time card to prove it. "Someone forged this," I said, my voice rising. "David, someone forged my signature." He didn't respond right away. He looked at my mother again. She remained perfectly still, her face a mask of concern and patience. "Rachel," he said slowly, "I witnessed this signature myself. You sat across from me? We discussed your wishes. You said you wanted your mother to have authority in case of emergency." I felt the room tilt. He was lying, or he believed he was telling the truth, which was somehow worse. "Who came to your office in July?" I demanded. "Who sat across from you?" He hesitated. "You did? Show me the security footage. Show me the sign-in log." His face changed, just slightly, a flicker of doubt. "We don't keep footage beyond 90 days, but I have my notes. I documented everything." Ethan spoke for the first time since I'd arrived. His voice was quiet, tentative. "Mom said you were overwhelmed. She said you asked for help but didn't want to admit it. She said you were proud, that you'd been struggling for a long time." I turned to him, and I felt something inside me crack. "You believe this? You really believe I signed away power of attorney and then forgot about it?" He shrugged, looked away. "I don't know, Rachel. You've been different lately." Distant Claire leaned forward, her voice syrupy with false concern. "We were protecting the house, Rach. We didn't want you to lose it. We didn't want something to happen while you were gone and not be able to help. Protecting it from me, that's what she meant. They were protecting my house from me." I looked back at David, at the documents spread across my counter, at the signature that looked almost like mine but wasn't quite right. The slant was off. The loop in the R was too big. It was close. Close enough to fool someone who wasn't looking carefully, but it wasn't me. I picked up the power of attorney document and studied the witness signature at the bottom. David Brennan, attorney at law, witnessed and notarized. My stomach turned. "David," I said slowly, "if I wasn't in your office that day, who was?" He didn't answer. My mother stood up from the table. She walked toward me, slowly, deliberately, and placed her hand on my shoulder. I flinched. "Rachel," she said softly, "I know this is hard. I know you're upset. But we did this because we love you, because we're family, and family takes care of each other." I shoved her hand off. "You broke into my house. You forged documents. You're sitting here eating brunch like you own the place?" She didn't react, didn't flinch. She just looked at me with that same calm, patient expression she'd worn my entire life. The one that said I was being unreasonable, dramatic, difficult. David cleared his throat. "Rachel, I think we should schedule a meeting. A proper meeting where we can go through everything step by step. But right now, I need you to understand something." He paused, looked at my mother, then back at me. "Your mother believes the family has senior claim to this property. And legally, given the documents we have on file, she may be right." The words hit me like a freight train. "Senior claim? To my house? The house I bought, the house with my name on the deed?" David continued, his voice maddeningly calm. "There's precedent for family occupancy rights, especially when there are questions about capacity and care. If this goes to court, a judge will look at the evidence, the affidavits, the witness statements, the power of attorney, and they'll make a determination about what's in your best interest." My best interest? I looked around the room, at my family sitting in my house, eating off my plates, acting like they'd saved me from myself, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan, and it had been in motion long before I ever left for California. I couldn't stay there. Not in that house. Not with them still inside, acting like they belonged. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and I walked out. Nobody tried to stop me. My mother just watched from the doorway as I got into my rental car, her face serene, like she'd already won. I drove to a Holiday Inn off the interstate and checked in using a credit card I knew they couldn't trace. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, scrolling through photos of my house. My house, trying to understand how everything I'd built could be stripped away so quickly, how a forged signature and a few lies could undo 30 years of work. The next morning I went back. Not inside. I wasn't ready for that. but I parked across the street and just looked at it. My white house with the blue door, except the door wasn't mine anymore. That wreath was still hanging there, my mother's wreath, staking her claim. I saw Tom walking his dog and got out of the car. He saw me and his face fell. "Rachel, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought they were helping you." "It's okay," I said, even though it wasn't. "Tom, did you see anything else? Anyone coming or going?" He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. "Actually," he said, "I found something in your mailbox a few weeks ago." I wasn't sure if I should mention it. It seemed personal. He handed me an envelope, thick manila, the kind used for legal documents. I turned it over and my breath caught. The address label read, Janice Monroe, Property Succession, my address, but my mother's name. I opened it right there on the sidewalk. Inside were papers, notes, printed emails, documents that looked like they'd been compiled over months. There was a list of my work trips, dates, destinations, how long I'd be gone. Someone had been tracking my schedule. There were notes about my house. Single-family residence, owner unmarried, no children, minimal local support system. It read like a surveillance report, like I was a target being assessed. And then, at the bottom, clipped to the other papers, was a handwritten note. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother's perfect cursive, the kind she'd forced me to practice for hours as a child. "Rachel works too much to settle. Houses need families, not women who leave." This was never about her being worried. This was never about protecting me or the house. This was about punishment. I had left Cedar Falls. I had built something without her permission. I had said no when she asked for keys, and this was her way of taking it back. I drove to my mother's hotel, Yes Hotel, because apparently she'd been staying at a Marriott, 2 miles from my house for the past 3 weeks, planning, coordinating. I found her in the restaurant, having breakfast with Claire. They looked up when I walked in, and neither of them seemed surprised to see me. I slammed the envelope down on the table. "What is this?" My mother dabbed her mouth with a napkin, completely calm. "It looks like mail, Rachel. This is documentation," I said, my voice shaking. "You've been planning this for months? You tracked my travel? You researched property law? You forged my signature." She took a sip of her coffee. "I didn't forge anything." "Then who did? Who sat in David's office pretending to be me?" She set her cup down gently and looked at me with those cold, assessing eyes I'd known my entire life. "Does it matter? The point is, you weren't using the house properly." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Using it properly? It's my house. I live there." She shook her head slowly, like I was a child who didn't understand basic math. "You live there alone. You travel constantly. You have no family there. No roots. Houses like that are meant for families. Rachel, for stability. For legacy, you treat it like a hotel." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't process what I was hearing. "So you decided to take it?" She didn't blink. "I decided to make sure it served its purpose." Claire finally spoke, her voice small. "Rach, maybe if you'd just let us help from the beginning, we wouldn't be here. Let you help. You broke into my house. You changed my locks. You're squatting in my home and acting like I'm the problem." My mother stood up, gathering her purse. "We're done with this conversation. You're emotional. When you're ready to discuss this rationally, we can talk. But until then, the house stays with family." I filed suit the next day. Fraud, forgery, unlawful occupancy, theft, my new lawyer, a woman named Patricia N.G., who looked at my case and called it one of the most brazen examples of elder manipulation she'd ever seen. Except in reverse, helped me file an emergency motion to remove them from the property. The judge granted a hearing. My mother showed up with David Brennan. When Patricia presented evidence that I'd been at work the day I supposedly signed the power of attorney, when she showed my time card, my badge swipe records, witness statements from coworkers, David went pale. He stood up and asked for a recess. 10 minutes later, he submitted his resignation from the case. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, just walked out of the courtroom and never contacted me again. But the damage was done. The power of attorney, even if forged, had been notarized. It had been filed. Undoing it wasn't simple. My mother had rights now, legally, even if they were based on lies. The house is tied up in court. Has been for months. I can't live there. They can't sell it. It just sits there empty now. Locked and frozen while lawyers argue over whose signature is real and whose concern was genuine. I'm staying in an extended stay. Hotel in Schaumburg. Small, temporary, everything I swore I'd never be again. I'm 50 years old and I'm living out of suitcases. Sleeping in a room that smells like disinfectant and other people's lives. My career is intact. My name is still on that deed. But the house, the thing I built, the thing that was supposed to be mine, it's a crime scene now. Evidence, a symbol of everything my family was willing to do to prove I didn't deserve it. I've stopped answering calls from numbers I don't recognize. I've stopped checking my mailbox at the hotel. But last night, something happened that made my blood run cold. I came back from a 12-hour shift, exhausted, barely able to stand. I unlocked my hotel room door, and there, on the floor, was a card. Not slipped under the door. On top of the floor, like someone had opened the door and placed it there. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was a Christmas card. Generic, the kind you buy in bulk at Walgreens. No envelope, no stamp, no return address. I opened it. Inside, written in my mother's perfect cursive, was a single line. Christmas belongs to families, Rachel. You can't lock us out forever. I checked the door. The lock wasn't damaged. The chain was intact. I called the front desk. No one had asked for my room number. No one had been given a key, but someone had been inside. Someone had left that card, and they wanted me to know they could reach me whenever they wanted. I'm 50 now, and I sleep with the lights on. I keep my phone next to my pillow. I check the locks 3 times before I go to bed. I don't know if I'll ever get my house back. I don't know if the courts will side with me or with the woman who spent my entire life teaching me that nothing I earned was ever really mine. But I know one thing. This isn't over, because my mother doesn't just want my house. She wants me to know that I was never supposed to have it in the first place. That leaving was a betrayal. That building a life without her permission was theft. And she'll keep coming, keep taking, keep reminding me that in the Monroe family, control isn't something you escape. It's something that follows you. Even when you think you've locked the door, even when you think you're finally safe, they find a way in. They always do. Because I don't know what they'll try to take next. If you think your family would never do this to you, think again. Subscribe and hit that bell, because next week, I'm sharing the evidence my lawyer tried to hide, and the one thing that finally made them panic. Drop a comment if you've ever felt like your family was watching you closer than you realized.